Suge Knight's fall has a timestamp. For a decade, Marion Suge Knight looked untouchable, turning Death Row Records into a West Coast machine of platinum albums and fear-based loyalty. But empires built on intimidation don't just crack, they snap. The snap came on January 29, 2015. Outside a burger stand in Compton, a confrontation, an SUV, and a decision that killed businessman Terry Carter and left another man injured. From there, the headlines turned into paperwork, arrest, years of court delays, and a 28-year prison sentence for voluntary manslaughter. This isn't just a rap story. It's a control story, how power becomes paranoia, and how one moment can turn a kingmaker into an inmate. Suge Knight didn't come out of a boardroom. He came out of Compton, born Marion Hugh Knight Jr. He grew up in Los Angeles County and attended Linwood High School, where he played football and ran track, graduating in 1983, big, athletic, and intimidating. Suge learned early that presence could be leverage. By the late 80s, he moved into the music world through roles, commonly described as security bodyguard, work and industry connections, close enough to see how money moved, and how pressure could move faster. Then came the turning point. Dr. Dre and the DOC wanted out of Ruthless Records. Former NWA manager Jerry Heller claimed Knight and Associates threatened him and Eazy-E to push contract releases, an account that has been publicly disputed, but it helped cement Suge's reputation as someone who could force outcomes. In 1991, Knight co-founded Death Row Records with Dr. Dre, the DOC, and Dick Griffey. The label became closely linked to Michael. Harry O. Harris as an early financial backer behind the scenes, supporter, with details sometimes described differently across sources, and it secured major label distribution through Jimmy Iovine's Interscope. Then the run started. The Chronic, 1992, Doggy Style, 1993, and suddenly the West had a new capital. But Death Row was never just music. It carried a reputation for intimidation and hard control around the label. The same force that built the dynasty, and the same force that would eventually help unravel it. Everything about Death Row was built to look inevitable, like Suge could bend outcomes just by walking into the room. But the first real turning point wasn't a courtroom, it was a mindset. By 1995, the label was printing money, and Suge started acting like a public boss, not a behind-the-scenes executive. At the 1995 Source Awards in New York City, he stepped to the mic and fired a shot at Bad Boy's Sean Puffy Combs, mocking executives who are all in the videos. It wasn't just a joke, it was Suge drawing a line in permanent marker, on camera, in front of the whole industry. August 3rd, 1995. Behind the scenes, that need for dominance tightened into paranoia. The more power Suge had, the more he seemed to believe it could be stolen. By a rival label, by a disloyal artist, even by people inside his own camp. And then he made the biggest move of all, Tupac Shakur. Tupac was imprisoned in New York in 1995, and Death Row Suge arranged his release on $1.4 million bail, tied to a 3-album deal. Tupac came home with something to prove, and Death Row became a war room, relentless recording, public feuds, and a mentality that treated disrespect like life or death. But the dynasty was already splitting. Dr. Dre, the co-founder and architect of the sound, left Death Row in 1996 and launched Aftermath soon after. Now the cracks widened fast. Suge's reputation for intimidation wasn't just rumor, it was part of what many people associated with Death Row's business dealings. Then came the night that rewired everything. September 7, 1996, in Las Vegas. Surveillance footage documented the MGM, grand altercation involving Tupac's group and Orlando Anderson, widely described as a Southside Compton Crips member. Hours later, Tupac was shot in a drive-by while riding with Suge. He died 6 days later. The murder is still surrounded by questions, theories, and later prosecutions, but Suge's consequence was immediate and provable. The Vegas fight fueled a probation violation, and in February 1997, he was sentenced to prison for violating probation from an earlier case. Death Row didn't collapse overnight, but its spine broke right there. The boss locked up, the star gone, and the empire finally exposed to daylight. After the 9-year probation violation sentence in 1997, Death Row didn't just lose its leader, it lost its gravity. Artists scattered, lawsuits piled up, and the label's mystique curdled into liability. Suge kept resurfacing, but the pattern stayed the same. Conflict, courtrooms, and the constant feeling he was always one incident away from being caged again. Then came the moment with a date and a camera angle. On January 29, 2015, Knight was asked to leave a commercial promotional shoot connected to the upcoming NWA biopic Straight Outta Compton after an argument with Cleabone Sloan, according to sheriff's officials. Soon after, investigators say Knight drove to Tam's Burgers near South Central Avenue and East Rosecrans in Compton, where another confrontation sparked. What happened next is the split screen that locked his future. Authorities' version: Knight, in a red Ford F-150 Raptor, traded punches with Sloan, reversed and knocked him down, then drove forward, killing businessman Terry Carter, 55, and injuring Sloan before driving off. Defense version reported Knight's lawyers argued he was fleeing attackers and feared for his life, and that Carter was a friend trying to break up the fight. Prosecutors initially charged him with murder, attempted murder, and hit and run, including 2 hit-and-run counts, and the case became a slow grind. Constant delays, health issues, and legal team chaos. On September 20, 2018, with trial approaching and a potential life sentence hanging over him, Knight pleaded no contest to voluntary manslaughter. On October 4, 2018, he was sentenced to 28 years in state prison, built from a manslaughter term, enhanced by California's 3 strikes law and a deadly weapon, allegation tied to using the truck. Now the Suge Knight way ends in routine, count times, locked doors, and years measured in paperwork. As of December 2025, he's incarcerated at R.J. Donovan Correctional Facility in San Diego, with parole eligibility listed for October 2034. That's the aftermath. Not myth, not legend, just a parking lot, a decision, and a system that finally had a clean line from action to consequence. Suge Knight's story leaves behind 2 shadows: the music and the method. On one hand, death row changed rap forever, turning a West Coast sound into a mainstream business blueprint and proving a regional movement could dominate global culture. Even decades later, the label name still carries weight. In February 2022, Snoop Dogg acquired the Death Row Records brand and began steering a revival, a reminder that the legacy outlived the chaos. On the other hand, Suge's control at any cost playbook is the caution. Label executives rarely say out loud, intimidation can create obedience, but it also breeds enemies, lawsuits, and isolation. The moment paranoia becomes strategy, every room feels like a setup, and eventually, you start driving your own life like a weapon. That's the lesson of January 29, 2015. Not that power disappears, but that consequences are patient. And when they arrive, they don't care how legendary you used to be.